I want to start with a quick poll just because this is something I've noticed here today, and I just want to confirm a suspicion I have. There's a lot of skin ink here. I see a lot of tattoos in the crowd. Raise your hand if you have tattoos. Just any single tattoo. Keep your hand up if you have a horned lizard tattoo. Okay, I thought it was going to be more. But wonderful. If they're tasteful, I would love to see in a tasteful location. I should say. I would love to see other people's horned lizard skin art. Anyway, thank you everybody for being here today. I really appreciate being in a room with a group of people who have such a devout passion for an obscure and wonderful critter or group of critters. And so I'm going to talk to you about, rather than the findings of a specific study, I'm going to kind of talk about the natural history of the animal, some ongoing management and research that's happening in this system. I find it to be really fascinating, and I think we'll all be able to appreciate sort of the different disciplines that have gone into understanding and managing this species. So let's get started. I'd first like to begin by acknowledging that nothing in our field is done by an individual alone. The work I'm going to talk about today is work that is decades in the making and that dozens of professionals from different disciplines and fields have all contributed to. So I'd first like to thank San Diego State University and the Rulon Clark's Lab of Animal Behavior for supporting my research. Brian Todd's lab at University of California, Davis has been very supportive. Additionally, the Good Lab at the University of Arizona has been wonderful collaborators. I'll talk a little bit about some of the great work that they're doing. And then the next talk here this afternoon is from Anthony Paulicki on the same topic. I'm going to talk a lot about the management of this focal species, and I'd just like to extend tremendous gratitude to all of these organizations for the efforts that they put in on behalf of the lizard, and also for their support and facilitation of the work that I'm doing. And last but not least, of course, thank you to the Horned Lizard Conservation Society for bringing us all here into the room today, and for also supporting my work. And thank you to the Phoenix Zoo for hosting this wonderful event. I'm going to talk to you guys about an animal I've spent a lot of time around today, and I didn't exactly bury the lead, but it should be no surprise that I'm going to talk to you all about a horned lizard. Today I'm going to talk to you about the natural history, ongoing conservation and management of and research around the Phrynosoma macali, the flat-tailed horned lizard. Woo! So who really is the flat-tailed horned lizard? To orient you geographically, the flat-tailed horned lizard is a Colorado desert endemic. The Colorado Desert is this western subsection of the Sonoran Desert that is largely influenced by the Colorado River. Colorado Desert, Colorado River, nothing to do with the state. As diurnal critters, they're cryptic, as you can see. Our lizard hiding right here, just sitting on the surface, completely invisible. It works for them because since they're diurnal and since they're not the fastest lizards on the landscape, although faster than you might think, they need to be able to hide from active predators. And as an abundant creature on the landscape, they can be food for pretty much anything out there. If they're detected, they make a wonderful snack for everything from loggerhead shrikes, who particularly love flat-tailed horned lizards and will spear them in bushes. Kid foxes will also eat them, sidewinders, leopard lizards. I could continue to name predators that eat these things, but they're legion. Anything that can fit one of these lizards in its mouth pretty much will. They also get to eat though, which is great, and they're a little picky. A couple species of harvester ant is really all that they will stomach, and they appear to have about the highest percentage of ants in their diet of any of the horned lizard species, although some of the evidence that we've been presented with today suggests that horned lizard diets are maybe more variable than we realize depending on what's available to them. They bury themselves in sand, both for predator avoidance and also for thermoregulation, and also probably because it feels nice. They're distributionally limited, but they're found pretty widely across suitable habitat, even when the microhabitat varies. They prefer those friable sandy soils that they can bury in and that they can burrow into, but you will find them waltzing across salt pans, you'll find them traipsing through mud hills, types of microhabitat that don't necessarily seem to have the suitable burrowing conditions or prey availability that you might expect to drive their microhabitat selection. They're active about 9 months of the year, roughly February through October. During that time, you start to see activity when the ground temperatures are around 65 degrees Fahrenheit on the cooler days, and on warm days, they typically have sought thermal refugia before the ground gets to about 115 degrees Fahrenheit, although there's exceptions, and you find some individuals who can really stand the heat. As you might expect, they are smaller when they're born. I'll just leave that for a moment because it's just lovely to see this. This is actually a picture that Anthony and I took while we were working with this animal in Yuma some years back. And after about 2 years, they reach sexual maturity and they begin contributing to the next generation, even if they have research accessories affixed. And now this is at least the second species we've seen today in copulation with a radio antenna on its back. I find that to be really fascinating and interesting. You wonder about the effects that our research has on these animals. You hope it doesn't interfere with kind of the important critical activities that they perform, and so it's always nice to see animals doing what animals do, even with the bother. Females will lay clutches from 1 to 8 eggs. Individual female condition is likely one of the major contributors to both clutch size and clutching frequency, because when conditions are right and there's enough availability of resources, they can double clutch in a single year. You're going to hear a lot more about the reproductive biology of this animal here in a little bit when Anthony takes the stage. So the flattail has the most limited distribution of any U.S. horned lizard. This map cuts the distribution off a little bit around the Gulf, but you're not missing too much down there. You can really tell how much this habitat has been fragmented by human activity between agriculture north and south of the Salton Sea, the way that the Colorado River Delta has been influenced by our use of water from the Colorado, and then also this mosaic of agriculture. We've really partitioned flat-tail habitat into sort of this, south of Yuma into El Pinacate and south into Mexico. We have the East Mesa, this is the Eastern Imperial Valley here. We have populations in the Coachella Valley, the Western Imperial Valley, up into the Borrego Valley here, and then down into Mexico here to the west of the Colorado River Delta. All of these activities of agriculture, the accidental filling of the Salton Trough in the early 1900s have all contributed towards the decline of the animal and the fragmentation of its habitat. Fragmentation from major roadways and widespread off-road vehicle use also influence flat-tail habitat in ways that are poorly understood. In addition to fragmentation, flat-tail habitat is impacted by solar and wind development, geothermal gypsum and soon lithium mining, invasive species like Sahara mustard, military land use, and climate change. Due to these factors, there have been multiple attempts at federal and state protections for the flat-tail, and to date, none of these efforts have passed or succeeded. I doubt that is settled, but as a consequence, there has been sort of a galvanized front of conservation and management to sort of address concerns of long-term persistence in the species. In response to the 1993 federal listing petition, a group of stakeholders from state and federal agencies formed a voluntary conservation committee, an interagency coordinating committee, if you will, and they established a range-wide management strategy designed to create best practices around management, acquire and protect suitable habitat, and then establish long-term monitoring and research goals for the species. These stakeholders established 5 management areas. We have the Yuma Desert Management Area, East Mesa and West Mesa, the Yuha Basin, Ocotillo Wells State Vehicular Recreation Area is a research area that operates under slightly different rules, and then the Borrego Badlands Management Area. On each of these management areas, annual monitoring is performed to understand, we use occupancy monitoring to understand large-scale shifts of distribution within those landscapes, and we use demography monitoring at a smaller scale, fewer plots, to understand shifts in population trends, abundance, sex ratio, survivorship, etc. Here you can see the first results of this range-wide monitoring published in 2015. On the left, this is the first published accounts of flat-tail abundance range-wide. At least this is range-wide for the United States. And so each of these is the abundance trends for over the course of years of demographic monitoring for each of the 5 management areas. And you can see there were questions earlier about do horned lizards exist on boom-bust cycles, or what sort of drives our population trends. We can see quite clearly here we have boom-bust cycles for flat-tailed horned lizards. And we still are gathering kind of information on what's driving these patterns long term. On the right here, we have occupancy estimates for each of the management areas across that whole region. This long-term monitoring program is a paragon of herpetological research and conservation, and there are very few monitoring programs designed for herpetofauna, and so this is really unique in that sense. However, population biology is just a single tool in a sea of ecological complexity, and you don't need to get hung up on what the details of this figure here, but while long-term trends of abundance and occupancy can be useful for management, alone their scope can't capture this complexity. And so it's important to approach conservation and management using a holistic, multidisciplinary ecological approach, assessing interactions across levels of ecological organization. Of the many subfields that we can use to understand ecology, I want to focus on the use of genetics, and specifically landscape genetics. In the molecular era, an emergent tool, landscape genetics allows researchers to ask pointed questions about how landscape configuration influences patterns of genetic diversity at the population and landscape level. For an example, this is a genetic principal components analysis here on the left, and you see clusters of related individuals that are colored by nationality. And what's really cool about this figure is the genetic PCA is almost a perfect reflection of the actual geography of Europe. So this is sort of a diagram of assortative mating in humans. And so I find that to be really fascinating. If that doesn't grab you, to provide an ecological example, for 2 species of amphibian in the northeast US, Homola and colleagues use microsatellite variation to quantify and visualize the contribution of population genetic structure contributors like migration. Here, blue is regions of high migration, and red are areas of weak migration. And as you might expect, these red polygons overlay densely populated human areas. So you can see how we can use genetic data to sort of understand how the biology of this animal is taking shape on the landscape. Landscape genetics itself is just one tool in a suite, and it can be massively beneficial to conservation when you planning, when you bolster tools like least cost path analysis here, which is used typically to identify regions of connectivity between populations, or to identify isolating landscape features that inhibit gene flow and connectivity. So how does this relate to the flat-tailed horned lizard? Well, to date, few studies have sort of tried to explore the genetics of the system, and I wanted to expand on the literature that exists to date. So in the early 2000s, Mulcahy and colleagues used mitochondrial markers to demonstrate phylogeographic divergence between populations separated by the Colorado River, and then here in the Imperial Valley. And then they found as well some evidence for a possible split up near the Coachella Valley, where I sort of showed these populations are separated. Here's that map again. You can see the influence of the Colorado River, which would have been a large barrier to dispersal even before human influence. And then you can tell the anthropogenic structures of agriculture, land use have also created kind of new boundaries on these time scales of human land use. The Salton Sea is really interesting because while the Salton Sea in its current state is like the product of essentially an accident, the damming of the Colorado River in the early 1900s, This has always been a basin that has collected water. An ancient Lake Kauai that would have historically occupied huge amounts of land here would also have, through its cycles of lacustrine events, inhibited dispersal from eastern and western populations in the Imperial Valley. I was going to say, because I thought he was going to be here, his poster is over here, but Dr. Andy Gaccio, go check out his poster, even though he's not here to tell you about it. He's done some really cool work as well. He found support using multi-locus single nucleotide polymorphism data, so essentially just a lot more markers than that mitochondrial study from some years prior. He found support for sort of the same phylogeographic splits. A model of two populations converged around the Colorado River, so you have a southeastern population and a northwestern population, and a model that includes three populations shows the same split, plus the Coachella Valley population separating out as well, given that the Coachella Valley population has now been separated from its closest contiguous populations now for about 100 years. Dr. Gaccio's work also highlighted regions of high migration and diversity. These areas of blue in the western Imperial Valley, south of Yuma, and down into Mexico at the El Pinacate Biosphere Reserve are all areas range-wide for this species that have shown high diversity and high degrees of migration. These studies have begun to paint a picture of genetic patterns imposed by recent evolutionary history. But for my doctoral research, I'm really curious about what shapes these patterns on management-relevant timescales. From 2021 to 2023, I collected tissue samples from flat-tailed horned lizards across the western Imperial Valley specifically. From the international border down south up to about where Highway 78 cuts east-west here on the south end of the Salton Sea. So this is a pretty wide sampling effort from one of those three major populations that shook out in those other two phylogeographic studies. Those polygons here are land managed by Naval Air Facility El Centro. Most of the sampling is centered around those due to permitting issues over the course of COVID, and sometimes you don't get to sample exactly where you want, but you get to sample where you can. So that's why we have sort of an uneven sampling effort here. First, what I want to do is I want to characterize genetic diversity parameters at this fine scale. So how does observed heterozygosity, one of the classic measures of standing genetic variation within a species, how does observed heterozygosity compare to what we might expect given our sampling? Do we see differences across subpopulations in things like allelic richness or the presence of private or rare alleles? And how can we use effective population size to assess the effects of genetic drift at a subpopulation level? Additionally, I want to know if there is evidence of fragmentation effects due to the development of Highway Interstate 8 or the slightly less trafficked California State 98 that separates the southern populations from those in the other parts of the western Imperial Valley. Matt Good and collaborators have a paper in review right now describing genetic fragmentation effects for less traveled highways south of Yuma, the Area Service Highway and Avenue B. That manuscript is in review right now, but I'm expecting to find similar trends across these two highways. I actually have a suite of samples down here that the BLM just got me that are not represented on this figure. And then lastly, I want to know, can we better understand things like dispersal by understanding genetic neighborhood sizes, the effects of isolation by distance, and parentage? Have we sampled individuals that are the offspring of other individuals we sampled? What is the distance between those things? This is very similar to kind of what Dean was showing us in his presentation of that genetic neighborhood size and the effects of dispersal within those Texas localities for the Texas horned lizard. The hope is that these recent studies underscore the broad applicability of genetics toolkits to help manage and conserve the species into the future. A high-quality genome assembly will provide a foundation for future researchers to use tools like whole genome sequencing and an assembled annotated genome to identify adaptive variation or selective sweeps at local and range-wide scales. Coalescent approaches may shed light on recent demographic histories that would give us insights into the resilience of flat-tailed populations to major stochastic changes in their environment, which could be essential to understanding how things like climate change might affect the persistence of the species into the future. And lastly, how can we monitor genetic population parameters through time to inform management and conservation action? Can we leverage existing conservation infrastructure, say a hypothetical long-term population monitoring program, and introduce novel tools for understanding and managing the species in perpetuity? When human power is the limiting factor, and anybody who's had to gather crews to do field work, you know that human power, getting people on the ground is the largest challenge. So when that is the limiting factor and signatories to this conservation agreement are spending the time and the money to generate that workforce, how do we maximize the data that we're collecting from that labor-intensive search effort to extend the scope of that project and that monitoring beyond parameters like population abundance and density? In this system, we can collect DNA-rich blood at a minimal cost to the lizard with a very minor caudal clip. We can collect a blood blot, is minimal cost to the lizard and minimal cost and time burden on the surveyors who are already finding these animals. And then we bring the myriad forms of genetic data into the fold that unlocks kind of untold potential for trying to understand the species from both a natural history perspective and also a management perspective. As natural history collections wane, novel sample collection techniques are taking form, including 3D photogrammetric sampling and partial tissue banking. Long-term sample storage at a natural history museum facility will leave the window open for managers and researchers to make use of this valuable data for years to come. So that's a quick summary of the work that I'm doing for my doctoral research at San Diego State. As you might be able to tell, I came at this from a management perspective. I had been working for California State Parks for some years before going back to school. And what's really interesting to me is this idea of how do we use research and establish a better understanding of the natural history of these animals to make better management decisions. And in that process, I've gotten to spend a lot more time around the academic research side of things. And I want to highlight just a small subset of the other work that's being done to help understand this animal, all of which in its own way can contribute toward the management of the species. For over a decade now, Matt Good's lab at the University of Arizona has executed flat-tail research in Yuma across disciplines. I mentioned before a paper and review detailing genetic fragmentation effects of an area highway. Anthony will be talking to you very shortly here about the reproductive ecology work he's done. And in his lab years ago, Mickey Parker and Allison Hawkins spent time telemetering flat tails post-translocation. In fact, I think a number of people in the room had helped with that project at some point. And they were also able to understand how predator-prey dynamics, specifically predation by loggerhead shrikes, which seem to really specialize on flat-tailed horned lizards in this landscape, how that may affect populations as well. So the Good Lab has really just put a tremendous amount of effort to approaching this system from an academic research standpoint. An exciting new direction for flat-tail horned lizard research is the work that my lab mate Leah is doing, and I hope you've either had time already to go check out her poster and hear about her work. I'm just gonna tell you a little bit about it, and then you can spend some time hearing about the incredible stuff she's working on. But the Clark Lab at San Diego State is pioneering the use of these animal-borne biologging tools in miniaturized systems to understand the natural history of wildlife better. The accelerometers are referred to as a next generation natural history tool because they allow us to get fine-scale behavior data that you simply can't get by observing these animals alone. Wildlife like rattlesnakes or small mammals can be difficult to observe engaging in natural behaviors. Flat-tailed horned lizards are much the same. When you approach them, they hunker down and they don't move. It's very difficult the way that Brian early in the day showed us that video of the regal horned lizard running around and making its way. With the exception of a handful of individuals, it's very difficult to find flat-tailed horned lizards and then sort of observe them from the blind. And so having this accelerometer biologging tool can help us understand deal movement patterns better. It can help us understand energetics. How much are they feeding? How often are they feeding? Are they active at night? These types of things. So go talk to Leah. The work she's doing is incredible. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what comes of it. This is, you can see the accelerometer glued to the back of this animal here. So yeah, this is work that myself and Ryan and Leah have worked very hard on. So check that out. So I want to end with this question that every one of us working with an obscure animal has been asked and will be asked again, which is, why should I care? Why am I personally so compelled by this management system? Well, for those of you who are at the Biology of Lizards conference this summer, Gordon Rada's talk at the end of the session really underscored the need to get into the field and explore the lives of these amazing creatures more. As we discover more about the nature of these animals, we uncover life history traits fundamental to managing them and preserving them. Single species conservation is a product of available legislative tools like the Endangered Species Act. And while it's imperfect, resources in these systems don't just fund work for the focal species. They can work for the wildlife community at large. Whoop. The Colorado Desert is a magnificently unique landscape, and flagship species like the desert bighorn sheep or like the flat-tailed horned lizard act as lightning rods to fuel research and preservation at scales where the entire system benefits from those things. As an added bonus, whenever you rally a lot of resources around an individual species, you increase opportunities for young professionals to gather skills in field science, applied wildlife conservation and management, and ecology. But more importantly, to me, I think you increase opportunities to get people into the field and build relationships with these landscapes, these communities, and with their component parts. And I just think that there's nothing better than being able to help facilitate people's excitement about systems that are underappreciated and undervalued. And lastly, if resources are applied wisely, those building relationships are locals who care about these native wildlife and are the ones who often might feel the most compelled to want to protect them long term. Finally, I won't succumb to the notion that reptiles are only maligned. Some people love reptiles, and damn near everybody loves horned lizards. So we gotta harness that love and get people to understand them and be interested in wildlife and preserving it. So that's what I've got for you today, and I'd be happy to take any questions.